Good evening, and welcome to the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee, the whole meeting for May 10th, 2016. Roll call, please.
Barry.
Present.
Rosen.
Present.
Charlotte. Present. Gottschall. Present. Heck.
Present.
Hood.
Present.
Ryder.
Present.
Okay, we're good. We have a quorum and we can go. We've already had our closed session. And now if you all join me and rise and say pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now offer this opportunity for public comment. If anybody would like to address the board, please do so. Not seeing anyone. If anybody would like to add an additional agenda item or raise a discussion topic for this evening, please do so now. Dr. Sylvie.
I just want to remind everybody that either at the next meeting or the June meeting, we need to bring back the discussion of if we're going to have board meetings here or at the new school next year. So I haven't put it on. I'm letting everybody think about it a little bit, but I will be gathering information on pluses and minuses of both so that everybody knows where that is, but we will certainly have lots of very nice places in the new building. However, the meetings would not be able to be live, so that's important to know too. So I'll be bringing that to you.
Maybe some idea might be to have committee of the whole in the school and the official formal one here.
See, that's a good idea too. So I will be bringing that to you.
Anybody have any other topics they want to see on an agenda? I'm going to raise a discussion topic that I appreciate your patience with for a couple minutes. I want to bring everybody's attention to an opinion piece that was in Saturday's North Shore,
Daily
North Shore. And it didn't get a lot of traction, but it raised some issues that are in print that need some correction. And so I spent part of the weekend drafting a response, working with Gene and Jay and John a little bit. There's a gentleman who put an opinion piece together where the big picture message was not arguable at all. It had to do with frustration with the increasing tax burden that citizens are bearing, and particularly the frustration with people with fixed incomes and the difficulty of keeping up with the tax increases. And then in his piece, he made several arguments trying to string things together that I think we need to respond to and clarify because they were not 100% aligned with the facts as we see them. So I wanted to thank Gene and Jay for helping me out with the draft. We will be posting a response to his editorial, his opinion piece, a brief response because it's very detailed to respond to it in depth, and with a link to our website, which any taxpayer can go to the website and see an explanation of several of the issues. And as you'll see, I'm going to highlight a couple of them too, because they're kind of big picture issues that we're starting to hear more and more because people just got their tax bills on Wednesday, and many of us might be in the same situation as I was, where my property taxes went up quite a bit, and I know that we approved a levy a little while in December that only called for like a 6 or 7% increase in taxes, and yet my taxes went up 13% overall and 15% for the district, and that was because my property value went up a ton, and that's good, but it also puts us in a situation of your property value is high, but you're also paying a bigger burden of the taxes. So anyways, I had this conversation with this gentleman, and he raised several points that I want to clarify, and the first of which is kind of what I was talking about just then. Why are the property taxes so high? And this gentleman was shocked at the magnitude of his tax increase. He thought his individual District 65 15% increase, his was 15%, and he thought it indicated that the district raised taxes by 15% overall, which we did not. Our increases were 6.7% in total. The short answer here is that, and most people are not aware of this, tax bills vary household to household. People don't know that. Not everyone's tax bill reflects the same percentage increase. Some are higher, some are lower than average, of that average of 6.7%. And those variations are related to property assessments. Many taxpayers are unaware that the county uses individual property assessments to calculate individual bills and that variation in tax bills across the community are related to changes in individual property assessments relative to the overall change in property value for the district. So it's that relationship between your individual property tax and the overall property increase for our district. A key piece of information here is knowing that the township assessor has determined that the aggregate value of all existing properties, we call it EAV, in the District 65 taxing area increased about 7.3%. So if your property value increased more than 7.3%, your tax bill will have increased at a rate higher than our 6.7% overall tax increase. If your property value went up less than 7.3%, you would see an increase of less than 0.8%. Thank you, Jaycon, for all this detail. Appreciate it, by the way. And here's a good one. In fact, if your value of your house went up less than so it may have even increased, but less than 6.5%, you'd see a decrease in your taxes, at least in your District 65 taxes from last year. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about how taxes are levied. People just don't see that. And to be quite honest, people don't really care, I think. They only care about the bottom number. But I wanted to make sure that we clarified these points. The other point was, why is our increase that we took greater than CPI? And as we said, CPI was, this gentleman I spoke to was looking at cost of living, and he said 2%. So I'm going to stick with his number. And the short answer is last year, District 65 restructured its debt service, saving the community about $2.5 million over the duration of that payment schedule, but requiring a one-time leveling of payments, which meant that we had a one-time tax increase that hit the community this year. Bear in mind that the biggest part of our tax extension, about 87%, is for operating expenses. And in that case, our increase was only 0.8%, right at CPI, correct? However, that debt burden portion of our tax, of our extensions increased from 9 to 13% this past year because of our leveling and restructuring of that debt. So we basically are saying we had to experience some short-term pain for long-term gain, because over the course of the remaining term of that bond, we're going to save $2.5 million for the district. So we deliberately leveled future debt payments that were scheduled to escalate over time. This leveling required a one-time increase that came into effect this year. Third point I want to make, and I appreciate your patience on this. I know this is tedious. A point that was made in this op-ed piece was a concern that the middle school construction schedule affected our taxes. The author questioned the wisdom behind fast-tracking the construction schedule and how that may have resulted in cost overruns and ultimately tax increases. The short answer is that fast-tracking the construction schedule ultimately saved taxpayers about $600,000 and did not contribute to costs beyond those originally planned for. The fast-track process saved the district that $600,000 by not having to rent classroom trailers nor pay for construction site general conditions for the months of September, October, November, and December, which would have added up to in the neighborhood of $600,000. Contingency funds were built into early budget estimates to absorb additional requirements that might have become apparent as the fast-track progressed. This decision was not only financial to fast-track the process. The board made a well-informed and very deliberate decision to fast-track the renovation so that the building was ready by September 7th, and to do what is best for students and not create a chaotic situation where the flow of education was disrupted for as much as 4 months with students spread out across portable classrooms in trailers. And the fourth and final point that I want to make tonight, and not directly related to his op-ed piece, but it flows, is so if the fast-track process did not cause cost overruns, what about cost overruns not associated with that? And there are cost overruns. There have been legitimate and unavoidable cost additions not related to the fast-track schedule. Expanding the biggest of which are I've got three I'm going to talk about here. The first is expanding the new classroom wing from 4 to 5 classes. The original concept assured that the same amount of education space in the new and old building, that the original concept assured that we would have the same amount of educational space in the new as in the old building. But further review with the community members revealed that it was important to ensure the same number of classrooms. So the first concepts we looked at did not have the same number of classrooms with the same number of educational space, and so that became apparent that we needed to change that. Other cost factors that affected costs were significant enhancements to the front entrance that will provide enhanced security and to make sure that we had an entryway consistent with village expectations. Third, we had additional mechanical equipment and acoustical engineering requirements to address neighborhood noise concerns. In total, all those things, we spent quite a bit more money. These additions, along with other minor issues, have brought the cost of the project from the first budget estimates, which ranged from $7.4 to $9.2 million, to where we're at a cap of $10.5 million. So I just wanted to set the record straight because there were a lot of implications in that piece, and people are going to read it and talk about it. And this is for the record. We will respond formally to his piece along with a link to the website with more detail that anybody's welcome to read. I also want to encourage anybody in the community who has questions about their tax bill, about why yours might have gone up more than your neighbors, or does it seem erroneously high, please contact us and we can walk you through the details of how this works. It's very confusing, and it took me a long time to figure out why my bill went up so much, so it's understandable. That's all I want to say about that.
I mean, I appreciate the amount of time you took into putting that out there and, doing the research for, to kind of as a response. I mean, I think this is a matter of record here. I don't know how many other outside of this letter in the Daily North Shore, I haven't heard anything from anyone.
We haven't received
And I mean, my only advice here is that this is the formal response. Unless over the next couple of weeks, each one of us begins to get more comment, or the school district does, I think what you just did is sufficient, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier. I think the most important part was to correct the incorrect statements that were made, because that only lights fires that are unnecessary. And Mark's done.
I mean, that was long, but that was really kind of hitting the highlights. There's actually a lot more detail that went behind that we could post, that to be as thorough as possible.
And we will post on our website.
Yeah.
It was a little difficult. There was a representation that we didn't do our jobs, our due diligence when we planned the renovation, and I felt a little resentment about that, since we put so much effort and so much diligence into reviewing what we were doing, that it needed addressing. That's what Mark was doing.
Yeah, I think there was a misstatement in one of the local news outlets suggesting that those cost overruns were related to the fact that we were doing it more quickly,
And I wrote a
actually-
letter to the editor on that as well.
when actually that process saved us money, and quite a bit.
So. But it's a lot of details.
Yep.
People don't keep track of it the way we do, so. And it took me a long time to bring all those details together, so. Anyways.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, he spent
Good job.
the past 48
I'm
hours.
sure.
So.
I'm sure.
Okay, so
Can I respectfully ask that ECRA goes first, so Steve can go home?
I've got no problem with that. Would we like to skip to item 6E in our ECRA
Steve,
agreement?
if we could move you up to the microphone up here. I'm going to have you answer questions.
Okay.
I'm going to give kind of the introduction. Kevin may need to be called on. As you looked at your board packet, it's time to renew our ECRA agreement. Some of the services that ECRA provides us were listed in your board memo, but specifically they provide a common and secure place for storing student learning data that we use for improvement of instruction, that we use for reporting, etc. They provide a professional development for close to 20 teachers and staff regarding local growth models and using student growth indicators and evaluation, which is mandated by law starting in September of this year. They've worked with district administrators to help set professional learning goals, again, mandated by law to do. They've assisted me and Dr. Rubenstein in developing the language and parameters that the district will be used for measuring student growth and teacher evaluations, as mandated by law. They developed a personalized dashboard for use on the district website that tracks strategic plan indicators. They've helped us in providing data to help us evaluate programs that are in place in the district to determine whether they're furthering the goals of student learning. And they've assisted with an overall evaluation of district finances as compared to student achievement to tie those correlations together to give us the value added. On several occasions, we've requested specific changes in how we interact with the data on the ECRIS portal, which is what ECRA calls their student learning storage area. And they've worked with us to implement solutions. Their work with us has been helpful, and actually for us it's really mandatory because we don't have enough manpower to do any of the things that they do for us. So some background on this agreement. Steve and I have met a couple times on the contract. I shared concerns that maybe you might have had or I had regarding student data security. After that, we turned it over to Hodges and Louisi, and one of their attorneys worked with ECRA in developing the contract that you see in front of you, which has been fully vetted out with not only Hodges but with ECRA. And so it is with extreme importance that we renew our agreement with ECRA in the services that they provide for us, because they really are invaluable. Steve is here. I'm going to ask him to say a couple things, and then we're here to answer any questions.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here again. I was here 3 or 4 years ago when you started a project, so it's good to see some of you here doing really your work. So good, important for the public. We did work with Jeff Golitz at Louisi Hodges, and on the agreement looked at provisions not just of the privacy part of the agreement, but also the term of the agreement, so that it goes year to year. Also the property rights of the agreement. But largely our conversations were around the use of data and protecting student data, which we're very serious about at ECRA Group. We know that's utmost important to you. We work with FERPA laws and the state student privacy acts all the time with schools, and we take a lot of pride in our work to safeguard that information. And across the nation, clearly the public is concerned about how schools take care of and safeguard student data, and have given parents over the years a lot more rights to access that information, to review that information, to correct that information. And so when information leaves the district, there's certainly a heightened awareness that we want to make sure it's protected. So we do, and in the agreement that you have here, there's provisions that talk about some of those things that we do. We are under FERPA as considered to be a school official and operate such as that because we work on your behalf. The data we collect from you, we use to inform you. You've got examples that Dr. Sophie mentioned earlier. And so we inform you of the information. It helps you make decisions. It helps the staff make decisions. And so in consideration of that, we're considered to be a school official. We're not, in the sense of our work, doing research projects with your data and a bunch of other data. So we work with your data to give it back to you, but that data doesn't go anywhere else. So if the contract is at some point in time terminated, then that data is destroyed, returned to you, however you want to handle that. But the research we do is for you on your behalf. And again, within the FERPA laws, those things are allowed for. Realizing the schools have contractors in their employees sometimes because of expertise that we bring. In the case that Dr. Sophie mentioned, we do work in districts as their data people, if you will. That's not uncommon for us. But again, regardless of our arrangements with districts, the data that comes to us, we work very hard to safeguard. We have not had a breach that I'm aware of any kind since I've been there for the last 5 years. And we have, as we've actually moved our offices to Schaumburg, and then that move secured our servers differently than we had when we were in Rosemont. So we feel good about our servers being contained in a storage facility where that's all they do is watch servers and store servers. So don't want to go a long time. I know you have questions potentially, but those are the highlights. I think again the value of the ECRA data to you is that we're looking at your student data, and because of our analytics, that goes way beyond being a data warehouse where we're just scoring a spreadsheet on the scores or the assessment information. We analyze the data and create new metrics that allow you to make informed decisions on things such as return on investment, which is important to a lot of boards today, which is student benchmarking and making it individualized to each individual student in your district and setting growth targets for those students. Many schools may use that data for school improvement. A lot of the information is used for RTI purposes or special ed purposes to, again, better serve kids. All that comes out of the analytic work that we do on your behalf as a client. Strategic planning dashboards, information comes through our data analysis for that purpose. We provide staff development, and so for the staff, which we think is a valuable piece of what goes on between us and our clients. But I think the piece that's really important is your students are looked at in terms of their growth based on their own individual performance historically. In many districts that do their own quote analysis, if you will, they're using spreadsheets and are able to look at national averages and saying, well, these are where our students fall nationally, and determining growth in that. But sometimes kids are way above the averages nationally, and sometimes they're way below the averages nationally. So the best thing you can do, which is what you're doing, is looking at individual student performance, setting individual student benchmarks. One of the other advantages that we bring to you, I think, is that besides advising and consulting with you on questions you have about assessments or measurement information, how to convey your messages, is that we keep ahead of the trends nationally. We work with districts across Illinois and the Midwest to know what are the issues coming up. As a result of that, we're always creating the next thing, if you will, that will help schools with performance, student information. And so I'm happy to talk about that a little bit tonight, first time. So just wanted you to be aware that we're always developing and creating. And hopefully you benefit. As an Equitable client, you always get whatever we're creating, you receive that as part of our agreement.
Steve, the only other thing I was going to add is I'm not sure if you're aware, Lake Forest is now engaged EPRA also. So in the next month, Hodges and Louisi and Kevin are working on a data sharing agreement with Lake Forest High School to not only allow our data to go to them so they can continue to work with our kids and look at our data, but for their data to come to us so that we can actually see how our kids progress through high school and how they do. So that will be next on the list.
What about the elementary schools in Lake Forest?
Did you
We're
guys
part-
get
yeah,
67?
We work through similar agreements with their
Okay.
attorney and their staff as well.
Yes.
Again, so they're part of the, in fact, we were there yesterday, I think it was their day before, or the last week with their staff on a project, so.
Unless I missed it, I don't see a termination clause for cause in here. Is that common not to include something like that?
It's simply a 90-day notice and simply
Well-
saying that we wish to terminate the agreement with a 90-day notice. And hopefully within that time period, we would work out any issues that might come up.
Yeah, that actually is not what it says. That's what I wish it said. But that's not what it says. What it says is that you've got 90 days in advance of the July 1st
Sure.
re-update,
Right.
which would suggest an argument that then if you don't give notice 90 days before, you're on board for another year, which I don't think is what we want.
And we haven't done that. We have very few issues that come up, but occasionally there are districts that have financial concerns and have not been able to maintain their involvement, and we don't hold anybody to that. It's a handshake kind of agreement for us. It's not a lengthy agreement. We put some guidelines in here, but districts want to change what they're doing. We're not going to hold anybody to that because I think it's important to work with districts. If you have issues that we can't resolve them, you have something else you're trying to do, then the 90 days is a working framework. But we have never had to invoke that.
But if that's the case,
Something you would like to,
Yeah, I think we should
Okay.
change that. in
Yeah,
the
that's
document.
I'll work with Steve and with Hodges to get that changed.
We tried to create some flexibility. The model used to be a multi-year agreement.
Yeah.
The districts today more and more are looking at renewal agreements so that they annually can make a decision. Thank you, Jim.
Can somebody just give me an example? I see the bullet points here. So, for example, worked with district administrators to help set professional learning goals. What exactly?
In all of our evaluations, including my own, we have to use student data. So in the summer, when we have our administrative retreat, we'll look back on all the data from the previous year and we'll set our goals for, like, for instance, I know last year we worked on growth in math and language arts. This year we focus more on some of our subgroups because we know that if we focus more, for instance, on our low income or our Spanish speaking kids, we can make a bigger bang for our buck and really increase our scores a little bit better. So we look at the data And then ECRA actually helps us set up the goal and helps us monitor it. So when the evaluations are due, especially for the other administrators in February, they run all the data and it's all done, and I just put in whether they met their goal or didn't meet their goal. And that's mandated by law to do that.
How many man hours do we get out of the contract? There's a passive element to this, of course, that they house the information and give us the data that they put together. But how many active man hours are there?
I would say it's unlimited because
Well, it's unlimited, but how many do we use? I'm trying to get a sense of
that I'd have to rely on for you, because we use them a lot this year for even just the student growth conversations that we have to do.
It would be difficult to quantify only because of the fact that I don't know how much behind the scenes work it is taking. So for instance, the student growth calculations that we are doing for our own teachers, that is stuff that while I have a doctorate and Dr. Sophie has a doctorate, that was stuff that we were guided by a statistician for
Help us, is what we said.
That they have people on staff who do that all day long for districts. So it would be difficult to quantify the number of hours behind the scenes. I can tell you that just in workshops and professional development alone, we're talking, probably 2 to 3 hours a week, and then above and beyond that, for
Telephone calls
and working with them on other.
We don't track it internally, Julie, which is probably unusual, but we don't. Again, historically way back, there used to be an hourly billable kind of a thing kept that people are familiar with, time and material kind of a thing. And it just got to be so cumbersome that we had to increase cost to track that. So we got rid of some of that and said, here's about what we think this is worth based on staff development, professional people that come out, and the people that work with the district are PhDs in statistical analysis and organizational development folks that are and so they're pretty highly trained in use of data and inferences that drawn from data to help staff know what you can come out of the data with. And we really don't limit the phone calls, so if people from the staff call, somebody's always going to answer the call that day. The school district has access to our president, our CEO, to people like me that probably aren't going to solve their statistical problem, but I'm available to help make sure they get the answers to the questions, and it pretty much is on a daily basis. But we do have user groups that we don't charge for, so anything that you do at the level you're with us is all provided. So as we do, I'm going to show you something tonight, but I want to open up another discussion. But we've got a new personalized learning platform that we're working schools with. We want to look at student performance and profiles with measures other than assessments. So more of the whole child, if you will. So that work we're doing as part of research and development, right? But that comes to you at no charge because you're a client. So as we do R&D, you benefit from that without additional charges or additional costs. So that's one of the benefits. And there's always R&D is a constant thing in our company.
Did we have additional charges last year?
No, we haven't had any additional charges in a year.
How does the contract term or price this year compare to last year? So I say,
Yeah, we've maintained our existing customer. We've not pricing, understanding strapped financial conditions in districts around here trying to make things work. So we've not.
So the 90-day notice in advance, I'll make sure that I work with Hodges and Steve to get that changed prior to board approval on the 24th. Any other questions?
I have a question for you. I know that one of the things in our strategic plan was to do individualized learning plans for each student.
That's what I was just talking about.
Okay, and so that's the implementation of personalized student growth. That okay.
And they're actually into that for the R&D, so we can continue on that path next year and actually bring that to a board meeting and show you what that looks like.
So do we have those completed for any of our students yet?
We do.
We do, yeah.
We do.
Can you say anything about? I know I'm putting you on the spot. I didn't let you know I was going to ask this ahead of time, but do we know like roughly?
We do for all.
Half or 10%.
I would say we have
all of them are completed.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
just not in the format that is easily usable yet. So that's the next step. So much of what happens that in the work that we do with ECRA is that is that we work together on sort of an idea. So this is an example of that. They will put together a prototype and then we work together to refine it. So that is something that has been put together for all of our kids across the district that now they're likely to roll out to all of their other clients.
And then we'll have to work on professional development for our teachers to better utilize that data, etc.
And is part of that using the information you're getting from Park?
Sure, it depends
Yes.
on the district. What you use for assessments is depending on what you want to use. For
I'm
your
just
growth.
curious if
Yes.
you're using
Most
that.
districts are using MAP or Park or both or
Right.
something that you use.
And we can
locally.
talk about that when we actually lay it out for you.
Okay.
But we've been very pleased with their responses to us, and they've really worked with us as our teachers have matured in the process. So I would say next year will be a good time, early fall, to really show a demonstration of what we're
The
doing with
consulting that you get from us, infrequently for districts, helps them streamline their assessment programs. We find typically across the country that districts over-assess kids. Now, I know you already knew that as parents and board members maybe, but for a purpose of just informing the district and or administrators, you can do a lot less assessment and have the same quality information you need to make decisions you want to make. But we're excited about the new learning and personalized learning plan and profile, if you will, where you can take the information you've collected and put it in one page and see what's happening social emotionally, what are the motivational components, what are the students' goals, are they on track for college and career ready, as well as your own local benchmarks that you want to establish. And so back to your question earlier, one of the things that happens is, as a result of the growth data you have, is you're setting individual benchmarks for each child. So you're determining based on past performance where they should be going in the future. And that's really important because this is just me talking to you as a grandparent, so I've seen this stuff. There's a kind of an acceptance for our kids are over the benchmarks in the state. We're happy, but we don't know how much higher those kids should be going.
Right.
In high-performing districts, there's a really need to encourage and nurture and push within reason of higher performance because we know kids can do more. But when you do national averages or just state bars in the sand, your kids are going to get over those bars with some high level of success when compared to other districts. And so how do you know where they should be? And that's how the individual benchmarks can help you.
Yeah, my background is in social work, not education. But as I look at the strategic plan, to me that seems like, if not the most important thing that I am watching for, one of the most. And so I just want to highlight that is part of what is happening in this relationship, and hopefully it does benefit us in the way that we hope it does.
You're right on target too, because nationally, I think if I remember the numbers, like 20 states now require individualized plans. In Illinois, it's permissive, encouraged, but some states actually mandate that. Some of that's within special ed, and some of that's beyond special ed into all kids. We really think it's important to see where your kids are at in a profile, if you will, of things beyond assessment. Using assessment to know that we're stretching our kids and the system is moving, but looking at other factors as well.
Any other questions? Steve, we want to thank you for coming. We really appreciate
With you
it.
in case you want to look at these.
That would be great. If you want to leave them with Kevin, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving back to item 6A, and budget parameters discussion. Mr. Khan is going to walk us through that.
And this is just a reminder, as Jay's preparing, that we're really on schedule to meet the board schedule of approving a tentative budget in June. In order to do that, it's important that everybody kind of understands what the parameters for the budget are. So that's what Jay is here for to review this evening.
Okay, so the school code requires that the board designate somebody to prepare a tentative budget. So that's what you will be doing tonight. And I wanted to lay out the broad assumptions that will go into our budget for next year. What's at the end of the assumption list, and probably should have been first on the list, is it will be a balanced operating budget. So revenues equal to expenses for operations. We do have the construction project going on, so we will be spending down our reserves as intended for that
Jay,
project.
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Kind of
more of a statement just for anybody who happens to be watching. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is according to our infinitely wise state statutes. We're budgeting for the money we've just issued tax bills for, right?
This district defers 100% of those taxes to next school year.
Yeah.
Some districts will use the portion that is received in June to fund current year operations.
Right.
So that is,
But we're talking about next year's budget.
we're talking about the 2016-17 school year
Right.
budget, correct?
And that's the funds that we levied in December, and the taxes bills were just sent out this past
Right.
week.
And we'll collect in June and September.
Okay,
of this year.
just to be clear. Thanks.
So, to your point, revenue, the assumption is well known. We know what the tax bills are, and the assumption going into the budget will be the $16,600,000 that we levied, with a collection rate of assumed of 98%. That is a little bit conservative. We tend to receive 99.5% of budget of taxes extended. Then there's an additional, that's our biggest source of revenue. It makes up 94% of our budget. And then some of the smaller revenue pieces, I'll just go through the assumptions. Consumer or corporate personal property replacement tax is a mouthful. We abbreviated CPPRT. This is a tax that was passed in the 1970s or 80s to replace a corporate tax that went away, and essentially, or a personal property tax that went away. And essentially, the only reason I mention it is because we just learned that the Department of Revenue made an error in the 2014 calculations, and we got an extra $20,000 we weren't entitled to. They haven't told us yet how they're going to get it back. I'm assuming that they're going to take half of it next year and half of it the following year in my budget. And so we receive about $185,000 a year in those payments, and I will be budgeting for slightly less than that next year. This year we didn't budget any general state aid, and I intend to continue that next year. I'm actually going to budget it because I don't want to see a big variance to budget, but I'm going to put it in the capital projects fund so that we don't rely on it for operations. And that money will just go towards our construction project for next year. We actually just learned, I got an email that Senate Bill 231 was passed in the Senate. That is the Andy Menar's school funding formula redo. And the initial calculations from the state showed we would lose $380,000. That wouldn't happen next year. We'd have 1 year of hold harmless, but that would kick in the following year. So we've been very conservative in our budgeting for state funds. We didn't really, and so I'm going to continue that next year so that if and when that does come to pass, it won't be a huge impact to our current operations. State categorical aid, special ed transportation, we under budgeted that this year, and these are some of the reasons we're seeing a significant surplus this year. I want to continue to do that next year in anticipation of the funding formula changes. Holding student fees flat, and then I don't budget significant amounts of miscellaneous income, but we do receive some every year, so that's just another contingency line. Are there any questions on revenue before I get on to expenditures? Expenditures, there's no increase in FTE. You've already approved the staffing for next year. I will be budgeting salaries based on our contract that's in place, our collective bargaining agreement, which has a $750 increase to the base and a 3% step for all teachers. That averages out to about 4.2% of a net increase for certified staff. We talked about educational support staff in closed session. That's yet to be determined, and then also the administrator salary increase is yet to be determined. And when those numbers are calculated, I'll plug those into the budget. I'm not anticipating any increased need for substitute teachers. We did, and then talking about insurance. We did get our rates for next year. The employee contribution by contract, again, will go up to 5% from 4% this year, up to a max contribution of $550 a year. We saw a 3.3% PPO increase, which is very good. Last year we saw a decrease as our rates matured. Now we're starting to see rates go up annually, and I expect it to go up probably more than that next year, but we had a good experience year this year. Our HMO rates went down. The majority of our spend is on the PPO, though, and so I expect to see a slight increase there. Our technology budget is a significant budget. We leased our computers last year for the first time, so we'll see year 2 of lease payments on both the staff computers and the 6th grade computers. To that we'll be adding new computers, so those 6th graders are going to be in 7th grade, and we'll be leasing new computers for the 6th graders. Next year I anticipate about $30,000 in payments for that. And just as a reminder, it's about $30,000 in payments each for the staff computers and for the computers for the kids who are now in 7th grade. We will be purchasing Chromebooks for the new 2nd graders. The current 2nd graders will take their Chromebooks to 3rd grade. We spend about $30,000 a year on Chromebooks for each grade level. We completed the wireless upgrade this year in the elementary school, and we'll be doing that next year. This will be part of the capital budget, is a wireless upgrade for the middle school for next year. And then we're also looking at print management system. Right now we have 1 year left on our copiers, and if it's economically feasible, we'd like to get new copiers next year district-wide and move to a more centralized printing system. So that's what I'm looking at for the capital budget. I'm holding supplies flat. We already approved a 2% increase in our transportation contract for next year. Our nighttime custodians, our GCA contract, is tied to the CPI, so I'm expecting a 0.7% increase for the regular, and then I'm rounding to 1% to cover any additional costs associated with the new building construction if we need extra overtime. Keeping special education budget consistent with last year. Again, that's a conservative budget every year because it's such a volatile expense depending on who moves into or out of our district. I'm expecting a 2% or budgeting a 2% increase in software licenses. The software companies are pretty consistent with their annual increases, but holding most other lines constant, other purchase services and professional development flat. We've talked at length about the middle school construction project. I will be budgeting the balance, the bond funds, and the balance up to $10.5 million. The new furniture for offices and classrooms. So the budget that has been passed, that 10.5, includes pretty much all the furniture for the building, with the exception of classroom furniture for the students. And depending on how the budget looks and how this year turns out, we will look at spending the additional, I think it was $35,000 for classroom furniture for students. So that's room per.
And that's just talking about that new addition, right?
No, that's for the old classrooms.
No, that's for the new classrooms.
I thought it was.
Well, for the additional new classroom, for the 6 classrooms.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
5.
sorry. You're
5
right.
classrooms. Other capital expenditures I'm holding flat. And we will be doing next year a long-term capital plan so that we'll have very specific plans for our capital expenditures out into the future so that we can budget for those. And then debt services will be budgeted as scheduled. Just a reminder that we just issued or just refinanced our debt, some of our 2008 bonds, and we'll be saving about $150,000 a year in debt service payments going out into the future starting next year.
For a total savings of?
For the first round was $1.3 million of total savings, and we still have $5 million left outstanding to refinance in the future. All that said, I'm expecting the ending fund balance to be roughly $5.5 million at the end of next fiscal year, or 35% of operating expenditures.
How does that 35% compare to your projections? I think it's been maybe 6 months since we saw the fund balance
Right.
come going
well-
down in a chart.
It's
Is it about what you expected? Is it higher? Is it lower than what you expected?
It's a little bit lower than what I presented previously, mostly due to the increase in the budget for the middle school. But I don't foresee, well, I think we're budgeting for we've already incorporated the downside risk for school funding formula changes. I think we got some good news on North Chicago recently. And so those two big uncertainties are kind of handled. I think a tax freeze would be another thing that could significantly impact our trajectory.
Yeah.
But the goal is to have a balanced budget every year and to make adjustments, corrections as we go, as necessary.
Thanks.
Any other questions on parameters?
All right, thanks, Jay. Moving on to item 6B, capturing kids' hearts, funding approval, and Dr. Kevin is.
Kevin is going to, as you know, you want to pull your memos out. He's going to give you about a 2-minute synopsis of what's in your memo. I know that Julie sent a couple questions today that Kevin will also answer in this 2-minute synopsis.
So in your board packet this evening, you have a memo from Jay and myself asking, with a little bit of background information about the Capturing Kids' Hearts training. A couple years ago, during the 2013-14 school year, we began sending some staff members to the training with the recognition that we needed to work on some of the soft skills that were actually being utilized in our classroom. So not exactly how do we teach math and science and social studies, but how do we actually build relationships with kids and in the classroom. And so we did that the first time during the 13-14 school year. We had a larger expense in August of 2014. And to answer Julie's question from today, to date, we've spent approximately $60,000 on the training altogether, and that would include training related to the group that puts it on is called the Flippin' Group, and then also the salaries that go along with having to pay staff for coming in during the summer when we did the training. So what we are proposing is that we go out and train the remaining members of our staff at a time during the summer. And so the Flippin' Group has actually offered us a contract for a couple of dates in August. Given the fact that the expenses total comes in over $25,000 per board policy and state law, we needed to bring that to you for your review. So we are doing that for you this evening.
And we'll be asking for approval on the May 24th, at the May 24th board meeting. The other thing that I wanted to add, because Kevin did a great job summarizing that, is that I want to remind everybody that 2 years ago, after this training had taken place, we had a very large beginning new teacher group at the elementary school. We also had quite a few last summer. So we don't have that many openings this year. We don't see the need for this many training sessions in the next year or two.
Right.
But we do feel we spent quite a bit of time with our administrative team talking about the importance of this and what we might have to give up in the professional development area next year to get this done. So,
Is there, I know you mentioned earlier, it's kind of a soft area, so there's really no way to measure outcomes or determine what the benefit is as opposed to not doing something like that?
There are some ways that we can measure it, and the ways that I would point out that the areas where we have seen a significant impact are in a couple of areas. Number one, our staff climate surveys have been nearly unanimously positive across the board, and that is a big change from several years ago. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that whereas my first year here, so 2013, 2014, we suspended 27 students either in school or out of school. During the last school year, we suspended one. In this school year, we are on track to have single-digit suspension rates. So we're in school or out of school suspensions. So while it's not easily quantifiable, those are the things that we look to. Those are the data points that we look to say, is this working or not working? And I can tell you that a couple weeks ago at the NSSED board meeting, this was we were a district that was spotlighted specifically for our work around capturing kids' hearts, and then the other piece that we're participating in through NSSED.
I'm going to share my reaction to this. I hear all the benefits, and I'm sure that they're real. And I read your memo, and it says creation of an environment that meets the social and emotional learning needs of all children. Certainly a laudable goal. But it seems to me that there is, you sort of have the herd effect or something like that. We've trained a good percentage of the people already, and so that language and that culture seems to be something we've achieved. And while there might be certainly some incremental benefit to continuing with this training, we've probably realized the greater benefit already. We're looking at spending in total about $100,000 on this training. That's a lot of money. Now it's an incremental cost of $32,000. I look at what we're proposing to do with the middle school, and we talked at such length about the alternatives there. And for that amount of money, we could remove and replace all existing corridor flooring, or we could regrade the whole field. When I look and say, where would I rather put these funds? Would I rather regrade the field, or would I rather train 30 more people in something that hopefully we hire really good people and we have a really good culture already? It seems to me that the money would better go elsewhere. That's my thought on it.
I appreciate the feedback. I think that climate and culture are two things that no amount of money can ever be too much to spend. I've worked in environments that where kids are not the center part of the classroom, and that is the part of it. That's the biggest part of this, is the relationship building. That's what comes with capturing kids' hearts. I can't speak highly enough of the training and of what has gone into it, and I understand that that this expense right now, the $32,000, is what we have going forward. We can't go back and erase what we've already spent. So the $32,000 is what we're talking about at this point.
And I would just share again that this is something we spent a lot of time in our administrative team talking about. And our administrators were willing to take another look at other things that we're being trained in. So this is going to be not only my recommendation, but it's going to be our administrative team recommendation that we go and have the rest of our staff trained on this. So.
Can you explain then how we avoid having this cost recur every few years after we bring new staff on? Is there a going forward plan, or are we going to every few years need to spend another $30,000 to have training?
So right now, the reason that we have 30 more staff members to train is because of the fact that we didn't get enough of our staff trained the last time.
I see.
And we had so many new staff over the last couple of years at the elementary school specifically. We don't look to have that many retirements or that many staff to replace over the coming school years. That was something that we really specifically looked at. How sustainable is this, and how can we look at this in the future? Are we going to need to do this every 2 years and spend this amount of money every 2 years? Because that's certainly not sustainable. Is this something that we'll need to look at smaller groups of people going every 4 or 5 years? That's a possibility. And then we can look at sending them offsite to another location, or to try and find another group that we can partner with.
And the volume of people will not be as big.
Yeah, I kind of question the same thing Julie said, that if the tangible benefit that we've had so far kind of went from the 27 to 1.
How much further can we go?
Yeah, are we kind of there?
Right.
I think that it's, again, I would point out that this is something that we really spent a lot of time talking about as administrators, and all of us feel that it really has created a situation in our buildings that is exemplary, and we feel that it's very important. So
Yeah, I think that's the point.
Yeah, just my 2 cents here. I've spent the last week in pain, like the rest of us, over a pretty substantial increase in the tax bill. And I've attempted to, because I remember 3 years ago when I ran on one of the legs we ran on was fiscal austerity, and I've been thinking about, well, where are there opportunities here to focus on saving costs? And we just went through the parameters for next year's budget, and you can see there's very few. I mean, the majority of our costs are related to salaries and benefits. To a large extent, that's already locked in. So there are limited opportunities to really identify areas where it's not necessary to spend money, and this is certainly one of them. And I think as a board, we have an obligation from a taxpayer's perspective to examine it pretty carefully. I understand the benefits. I'm not going to argue with those. I think everyone's made those clear. But I think also we have to be mindful of an incremental expense that's a variable above and beyond where I would deem as being necessary for our ongoing daily operation.
So I've heard comments about this training from different people on our staff at different times, and when people describe it, a couple things. One is I hear descriptions of how they're interacting with kids, like greeting them at the door and shaking their hand as they come in the classroom, which is really a big change from how we did things before. So I like the things that I hear them describe as, I'm sure that's just one teeny tiny part of it, but I also hear teachers describing it as almost kind of a life-changing. It really changes the way they approach working with kids in a major way. So it's not a very narrowly focused thing.
Which is why I think that we saw such a decrease in the suspensions.
But here's my question. If we say we want this to be part of our culture, is there any mechanism where you can get people trained so that we can, train our own staff for
They don't
this?
have a train
They don't do that?
We don't have a train-the-trainer on.
Okay.
that's certainly something that, because we talked about that also, and it's something I'd be willing to make a phone call to them about, because the way, at the cost of this and what's going on in the state, I think they need to consider that.
To do
And
something.
we have a staff that could easily
I
be a
think
pilot program for that.
I would encourage us to look into that. I mean, beyond that, I wouldn't really comment on the cost of it, other than, I kind of feel that, you guys have to make decisions about what's your greatest priority in staff training. And I think one of the parameters was that cost, the overall cost, was not going up. So this is a part of us not increasing our cost.
Part of that PD budget.
Right.
Okay, so let me understand that fully. So this isn't an additional $32,000 we need to spend. This is just, you're asking how we might allocate the resources we already have identified as
part of
professional development.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's
So this is
flat.
just
It's
a
gonna be flat.
particular allocation of budgeted dollars.
Yes.
But here's my point on that. We're spending a lot more on the renovation than we anticipated. So I think we need to look for opportunities to cut back. So maybe we don't do the training this year. Maybe we'll wait until we have a greater percentage of people that we can fill up the whole class of 50 in some future years when the sting of the tax bill has gone away a little bit and the renovation's done and locked in, and then we revisit this. Again, I get back to, I think we've realized the majority of the benefit that we're going to get for the the training that we've done. You talk about reading people in a classroom, that sounds great, but now, the person across the hall sees, her friend, teacher do that, and now they do it. So you sort of have built that culture a little bit already. So I wouldn't view this as a strong need at this point, given the money that we're putting into the renovation.
So if we didn't spend it on this professional development, would we see, presumably we could recognize some savings up at the professional development budget that we currently have established, right?
Would we have voted to, I would suggest that we also consider that if Dr. Sophie and her staff chose to bring her entire professional development plan, that in this year they're spending it all on this one major piece. In prior years they've spent it on multiple things.
We're still gonna have multiple, but
they
it's
didn't
Yeah,
have,
right.
but because it was
Threshold
under the
we're looking
threshold,
at.
they didn't have to bring it to us for such in-depth approval.
Yeah.
Would we have rejected the entire budget because of this? I think probably would not have. I think we need to consider.
So what is the entire budget for professional development?
that's what Jade is working on right now
Oh,
for the
okay.
for his tentative
But it
budget.
will be flat relative to
It will
last
be
year's.
flat compared to this past year's.
But then again, we don't know how much it is, and it's our obligation to look at it to determine whether it's being spent wisely, regardless of what the plan is.
What we could do, because the tentative budget will not be done yet, is I could get you information on what we spent on professional development this year, so that you know. Going into detail on that line by line, we could do that. We haven't done that here before, because that's kind of our administrative decisions.
Right.
That
Right,
gets us
and
back to the dance floor conversation.
Right. I'm sensitive to that. I mean, if we're not talking about an incremental increase, then aren't we just simply assessing from our distant perspective the value of this particular professional
Which we are
development,
not
which is
trained
not
to
us.
We're not
Right.
trained to do.
I recognize that. I think that's a dangerous.
And this normally wouldn't have even come to you. You would have approved the professional development budget,
Yeah.
and this would have been in there and has been in there. The difference this time is because of the situation that we've got to book this, it's going to be over the $25,000 threshold, which we get back because staff from other districts are going to wind up paying us money for that.
Well, I guess a few minutes ago we talked about the parameters for next year. I guess I'm not comfortable debating the merits of the particular program really, but just to say maybe we need to backtrack to that. Are we looking for some decrease in spending on staff development? Because really, I feel pretty strongly it's up to you guys to determine how we do it. But I didn't hear anybody saying, well, no, we need to talk about a decrease in spending on that a couple minutes ago. So I don't know where that leaves us.
How does all this fall into place? The 30 people we already have, have they signed up for it, or they're going to be available in August? Because I assume this is outside of the school year.
It's outside of the school year, and it is in August, and we do need to pay them to go.
Right.
And
they're all signed up and
They can't officially sign up because the board has to approve it first.
so I'm a catch-22, don't know if we'll have to do it.
How confident are we that we'll get 20 or
30.
We're confident we'll have them.
even in August? Okay.
So the only other thing we can do, we have one more admin team meeting. We can talk a little bit more about the professional development budget. But I will be bringing this for approval at the May 24th meeting.
I think it would be helpful to see more of the big picture because I think that's what we're.
Yeah,
empowered to do.
to me, one of the indicators, the primary indicator you used was the drop in suspensions. That probably wouldn't have been the best evidence, in my opinion, to cite. That's one thing, but how does this training contribute to the learning environment overall, and how has the learning environment improved? And I would cite some of those indicators. To me, the drop in suspensions would be one element, be able to cite how's this training helped teachers, and what are those rooms doing in terms of performance and that group of students overall, if that
So we
makes
can
sense.
do a little bit more examples, but I also
Yeah,
think you need to know the budget for PD.
I agree with that. And if it needs to be said, then I'll say it. I think we should look for opportunities to cut the budget. If there are areas that we can save in, even though, because we do see the precipitous decline in the fund balance in future years, assuming maybe, worst case scenario, maybe we don't have to assume that, but there certainly is a risk, and we have spent more, and we should be looking for ways to recoup the extra couple million that we spent on that renovation.
Well, if the property tax freeze goes into effect, then we're going to be facing that as a situation, lower revenue. So we need to begin to practice how we're going to look at the budget and save money potentially.
So let's talk about it at admin team, and then I will send out an email and let you know what the administrators decided. We do have a meeting next Tuesday.
And so, keeping in mind our role here, I guess my thought would be maybe look for ways to cut the overall PD budget, not necessarily this particular program, right? Is there 15,000 elsewhere that we can cut? Because I do appreciate what you're saying. I also appreciate that you guys know best how to run the schools. So.
And then my only other comment to that is if this board wants to get into line by line evaluation of the budget, I promise you that if it's up to me, I'll find a lot more cuts that are further away from our investment in teachers and how they teach and how our students learn. So, I mean, if we want to go there and really stick our noses in the budget, my instinct wouldn't be to start here.
We'll talk about this at admin team next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Next item is a review of the Lake Bluff Middle School musical financials, and I believe that will be led by
Do you have the handouts for
Mr.
those?
Khan.
While Jay is passing those out, again, this is just a reminder that several of you asked after the phenomenal musical that we had to go through exactly what the costs are and what we're bringing in, and that's what Jay is reviewing for us this evening. Okay.
Okay, the vast majority of all the bills and receipts are in, and what you have in front of you is are the totals. First, what we put in the original budget for this year, and then the final results next to it, and then the change. So we budgeted for $15,000 of musical revenue. Musical brought in approximately $19,600. That's composed of both ticket sales as well as collections from staff and students for things like t-shirts, pizza, and the like. Musical stipends were budgeted at $26,400 and came in on budget. We paid all those out. And then I'll look at the combined supplies and services. Those are not necessarily budgeted. I booked them to the proper account, but they're kind of budgeted in total. The original budget was $11,000. The actuals were $18,600. A total difference of $7,600. And then, so the net cost was versus a budget of $38,000 was $45,600 for a net impact of a net cost to this of $26,000 after revenue.
So
We're not tracking what individual families are also being asked to spend on this, because I've gotten reports of families spending over $100 costuming and outfitting their kids for the musical, and I do think in the future that may be something we want to keep track of, because it on first glance it feels kind of outrageous to me, but.
So as it relates to the last topic, I'm going to go right into this and say what we just talked about actually is an investment that impacts every kid at the school. This impacts only 2/3. And, if as we evaluate line items going forward and start to anticipate, budgets that are going to get tighter, I would say that this is an area that we should look at to have a greater percentage of the funding come from the actual participants than from the school district.
Well, if you double ticket prices, effectively you would have
Paid for it?
paid for.
Oh, close.
Yeah, that is unlikely to happen, I suspect.
How much was it?
Oh, double ticket prices, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
I know,
okay.
right?
That brings you
Yeah,
to
that
26,800, and your net cost is 45,600, so that's not gonna cover it.
Well, you triple
Yeah.
it then, triple it. Make
Oh,
it triple.
yeah.
Because you're 13 was what we took in, so if you
Tickets.
add another 26 to that, it'd be tripling it, I suppose.
I guess that's the way to get the people who participate to
be-
pay.
But I
Their
suspect that
grandparents
if we
would
were to poll the community and maybe thought should be given to sending out some sort of survey to get people's reaction and input on the musical, I suspect what you might find, because I heard it from a lot of parents, I confess I feel it myself, is that while the musical is a wonderful thing for everyone to participate on, it doesn't need to be nearly as grand as it is. And I hearken back to the $750 Dragon, which is what, like, you know, $200 for every minute on stage. You know, there has got to be opportunity that we can, to rein in the cost. The costumes are outstanding. I mean, it really is, the set is outstanding. But do we really need all of that to keep the enthusiasm alive and give our kids a chance to participate? I don't know. It seems to me we could set a lower budget amount and let the school and the team work through it from there, with the understanding that this just doesn't need to be a $45,000 production.
I can tell you, if you poll, given the fact that 80% of our residents don't have kids in the school, and if you poll those residents, I can tell you what your response is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
As soon
Yeah.
as
So-
Susan says something, then I'm going to reiterate a couple things.
Okay. So I'm curious as to how this cost compares to athletic costs and the participation in athletics, because this is most certainly, I think, more closely related to our educational mission than how to play basketball, for example.
We'll
Though
look
that's
at
important too.
that. We'll look at that.
But as to the number of kids who could participate in the basketball team, the 7th grade boys team had 12 boys on it out of 50 boys. Certainly not 2/3. And I suspect we don't spend nearly this on the cost of basketball. But I think we have to look at this in the overall framework of, all right, there's lots of things we spend money on, and this one is a pretty highly educational, has a pretty high educational value to it, I think. So I'd like to not just look at this extracurricular activity, but I'd like to look at it in the context of how much we spend on extracurricular activities and the extent to which the parents whose kids participate are compensating. I think it's like a $60 or $100 fee to be in basketball or whatever. So a couple of things to think about. I mean, I think this looks like a lot, but maybe in comparison to the number of kids that we have who are involved and the educational value of it in comparison to the value of soccer or whatever, the cost is not that great.
Tell me a little bit about, I mean, the biggest line item here are musical stipends. Tell me a little bit about that.
That's all per the, remember when we sat at the table and they talked about
Right.
that? That's exactly
Those are
what
the
that is.
collective bargaining
The
agreement.
collective, part of the
They're
collective
list-
bargaining
It's a
agreement.
list of stipends that the staff felt were necessary to put on musical, and we categorized them in 3 different categories.
So if you change the musical to something else, a play, for example, are the stipends still?
No, then obviously you don't need a choreographer if you're doing.
So that's what I meant by a
regular
breakdown. So the breakdown is choreographer, musical director.
makeup.
There's 3 tiers. The first tier are the director and the vocal director, and then in tier 2 you have the choreographer, costume head, producer, and set designer, and then the 3rd tier is a head hair person, a head makeup person, a crew person, and then a sound and light
We're paying
person.
stipends for people to do that?
Yes.
And if you talk to the people who are in the musical, I think they would look at this and say, the stipends are just like the cost of a coach, and should be a district expense, and we've covered in ticket sales and other money brought in, we've covered all of the supplies and services that we've spent to put on the musical.
I think the broader point, maybe this is what Susan's getting to, is if at some point we need to begin prioritizing places where we could save money, I think all the extracurricular programs need to be looked at very closely. And furthermore, I think places like the PTO and Alliance, for instance, need to be brought into those conversations in anticipation of things that we may need to be raising money for outside of the budget to keep up some level of programming in the event that we have to make those extracurricular cuts at some point.
So what I have down, I just want to make sure I have all this. It sounds like generally we should consider maybe reducing the budget for our musical. We do musicals because musicals actually give us the opportunity to involve 2/3 of our kids, whereas plays do not.
Middle school kids.
Middle school.
To be clear.
Yes. I think it's important. I've heard from a couple of you that we keep track of what parents are asked to donate as far as not only this club but other clubs and extracurriculars. I think it's important that we pull the community and ask some general questions about the musical. And that would be middle school kids, 6th, 7th, 8th. We would pull their parents and ask them questions about what are the strengths, what are areas of opportunity, how do you feel about the amount of money you have to donate.
Yeah, how much did you spend? We can maybe collect that in a survey. And
Yeah.
I'd ask too if people would prefer a play. It seems counterintuitive to me that the musical would get more participation than a play would. Although certainly we get very
No,
high.
because
That's
there's
just
more
general
people on
knowledge
stage.
because
Production numbers in a musical.
Oh,
that you
I
don't
see.
have in
Okay.
a play.
there's a, I mean,
You can
it's a
have
lot less
people in
kids.
the musical.
Okay.
Of
course.
I think that we have to meet with the PTO and Alliance, which is on my list of things to do anyway. So I think what we're going to need to do is get some information together. We'll try to get the survey out in the next 2 weeks so that we get the parents before the end of the school year, because believe it or not, we're not that far away from that. And then as we work on the development of our tentative budget, we can come in with a little bit less of a budget on the player musical and hopefully incorporate some of the feedback that we get from parents on this, as well as looking at other stipend positions and how we're spending that money.
And just like all in cost, like the bus, how much we spend on the bus to get kids to the back and forth of the games. You know, for example, like I think the all-in cost of everything that we do isn't just the stipend. That's a big
It's
part of it.
well, look at Odyssey of the Mind. We are, you know, that for a small group of kids, and this is a big deal. They go to World, but we're going to have to, and that may be something we have to work on this summer or early fall. We're going to have to come up with, okay, we want to support this. We'll support the general season, but anything outside of the regular season when you go to World is going to have to be covered by,
I would assume it was.
Right.
because it's new,
Bake sale.
it's brand new. So
I mean, I think that this 45,613 number looks really high at first glance, and I want us to look at how is our extracurricular spending compared with what we think it ought to be, or with what other schools are doing, or per capita, how does this measure up to where else we're spending money? I think those are all good things to look at, but I also want to say this. I would like this musical to be more closely supervised by the administration. And I would beg of you never to allow them to spend $750 on a dragon, nor over $400 on a confetti machine,
Absolutely.
which is practically the worst thing for the environment I can think of, and probably the most wasteful thing that I've ever heard of spending money on. Because I'm right there with you on training the teachers with the children, finding children's hearts, or making that connection, whatever it's called. Yeah.
Finding
But
teachers' hearts.
this makes me crazy, and I guarantee you won't find a taxpayer out there who's going to be happy about over $1,000 spent on those two things.
I've got enough direction to
Well,
move on that.
I do think the per capita is important. I really do.
I do too.
Yeah, but this is low hanging fruit. A $400 confetti machine. I know this puts us way down in the weeds, but I still, this is an issue.
I understand that. I don't disagree with it. I just think we need to look at per capita what our extracurriculars are doing.
I like looking at it at that bigger level. at the total extracurricular budget and
Yeah, that's where I think it should
and
be,
allow
because
administration to make the decision of how we spend
Right.
some of that piece.
I mean, I think that's what the new compact with between school districts and the community and the students that they serve, that's where it's going to be. I mean, I think all the school districts are going to be at this point where they're going to be looking at extracurriculars and what's the new relationship in terms of how those things get funded. I mean, it's not just going to be here. Actually, we're probably better off. I mean, I grew up in a community in downstate Illinois that had to move all that stuff off budget 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So if you wanted a football team, they had to raise the money to have a football team that year. So there's a lot of places in other parts of Illinois that have been dealing with this for a long time, and it's a more equitable way to do it. If we're put in that position, which I think we will be.
Yeah. And I do think more, participation, more ways to have the participants
And
rather than the taxpayers contribute more.
And it still gets done because parents are really passionate about the arts and they're really passionate about athletics. So they find a way to get it done.
The difference is, though, that one difference I would point out is that I think we need to look at it in aggregate, because people move to this community for things like extracurriculars and the musical. It's an important thing that distinguishes our community from other communities. So I wouldn't be screaming henny penny, the sky's falling just yet. I think we need to step back and look at it carefully and in an aggregate. But people move here for those reasons, and you don't want to mess with the culture of the town. And that's kind of close to that.
Mark, I think that's very, very true. What I'd be interested in seeing is, I know this musical's been going on for at least 30 years that I'm aware of. I'm curious as to how this has crept up in cost over the years.
We actually, I have paperwork because we reconstructed last year at this time, or when you first got here, Jay. So let me see what I can round up, because it grew exponentially in
And
the
I
past 10
guarantee the
years.
kids had as much fun doing it 30 years ago as they do now.
Okay, I've got enough
A lot to
direction.
think about, right? Okay, moving on. How about that? Next item would be Board Policy 5330, 6 days vacation, holidays, and leaves. And Dr. Sophie's going to take us through that?
Well, I'm not really going to take you through it. All we've done here is we took the board policy and changed it to reflect what we do. So that's all we did with it. And it doesn't go to the policy committee because it's strictly a practice.
There's
type
not very many
policy.
edits in there.
No, there's not a whole lot of edits, but there were some that we had to make.
So it's not a policy, it's a practice? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the policy had to align with our practice.
I see. So we're not changing.
We're not
What we're
changing
doing.
anything, what we're doing, no. And it will go for first read at the next meeting.
So the question I had wasn't related to any of the changes, so perhaps we should take it offline. But it was regarding the use of sick leave for non-sick things.
Okay.
Things that where nobody's sick, but it's the use of sick leave. How did we land there, and is that typical? Right. So there's several examples here where nobody's sick, but they can use sick leave.
You can use sick leave based on Illinois school code for someone that is sick within your house,
Mm-hmm.
immediate family members that are defined. What specifically are you talking about?
Well, I'm just,
Because
when a woman gives birth, she's disabled for some period of time and she gets paid
right.
sick time as a result. But we provide 30 days, presumably, to woman or man, paid sick leave, even where no one's in the circumstance of adoption, and presumably
That's
equally applies to men and women.
That's law now for paternity as for and adoption. That
So-
changed a couple of years ago.
I'm interested to look at that because that's so does
That's
the
why.
woman get her sick time and 30 more days?
No.
She
Jay
should.
and I have been clean. No,
All right, I'll look into it.
women get the time that they're deemed. Jay hears me talk about this with all our female teachers. So if you have a normal delivery, that's usually 6 weeks. So you've got 6 weeks
Yeah.
of sick leave. Now, if Mark, as a husband, his wife has the baby, which, no offense, I'm not saying anything, but the husbands really aren't sick. All right, John. The bottom line though is if John's wife has a baby, it's really gonna kill me.
It's gonna be in the news.
If John's wife has a
We'll have the
baby and
National
she's sick
Enquirer
for
on
6
this.
weeks, you could take up to 6 weeks of paid sick leave because that's an immediate family member.
Sorry, Ann.
Oh,
We
I
know
see.
you watch.
You know,
I see.
You know,
All right.
Ann will be talking to you about this.
I'll look into the law. I'm just curious
That's-
about
that's
that
all
because
it's
it
about.
applies. It's different.
So,
than I've
or if
done
you have a
stuff
sick
in the
spouse, then, and it's all based upon what the doctor deems you
But
sick.
nobody is all is. I don't. Yeah, nobody at all is sick in the terms of an adoption. Now, I'm not
But the law,
suggesting we change it, but I'm just curious.
the law changed on that though because of all the issues that came about from adoptive parents. That happened very recently.
Okay.
So,
I'm curious about that. I'll look into it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments, concerns? Any comment from the audience?
if your wife is a baby,
I hear none.
let me know.
So may I have a motion to adjourn at 8:32?
So moved.
Nope, pause. Okay, we have one more comment from the peanut
You
gallery.
know, the train was late and therefore I missed the first 10 minutes of the closed session. I'd like to ask if my fellow board members would be willing to stay so we can go into closed session so that you can just catch me up on what I missed. Is that something we can do? Won't take long?
I can catch you up because you only
By
missed.
phone.
You only missed one thing.
Right, there might be some discussion. I just
There was.
Can I move to go into closed session?
A second.
Second, okay.
We have to go off camera though.
Yep,
Yes.
Sure.
I move.
You have a second.
No, second.
You have a
I
second.
have to do a
Roll call vote.
I need the,
Okay,
because
this
we
has
have.
never been done before. This is really exciting.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Charlo, yes. Barry,
Sure.
Rosen,
Yes.
Ryder,
Yes.
Hank.
Yes.
Okay.
If you could leave that for Leanne, because we'll have to go.